Sorry, I just admitted.
You're good.
Traffic's awesome these days. Traffic. Can I roll call?
Trustee Reed.
Here.
Trustee Hallwaxer. Trustee Rubin.
Here. Don't think there's any public comment. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
It's your final meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry I'm rushing.
No, that's
Make it roll
okay.
late.
So we'll be talking about the April Treasurer's Report tonight, our normal updates with financial highlights, our community investment program updates, and then we will round out the evening with a discussion about fundraising. So moving right into the general fund, our regular update on property taxes. We did, as promised, get a good share of property tax receipts in April. We're now higher than this time last year. We have that $1.9 million number that's kind of throwing everything off on a cash basis. So when we remove the prior year payments that really don't belong in this year, comparing apples to apples, we're about $644,000 higher on a year-to-date budget basis, like what we were expecting to receive versus what we received. We're about $644,000 up, which is good. This month, a number of our revenues kind of missed some targets in terms of comparisons as to the same month last year and also our budgetary targets. Specifically, we're looking at income tax, utility tax, permits, telecom, and ambulance, as well as sales taxes. Sales taxes took a real dip. Not a cause for alarm though, because when you're looking at kind of year-to-date numbers and what we were expecting to receive month over month through this point in the year, from a year-to-date perspective, we're still in line with total revenue. So not a cause to panic, but something we certainly just want to keep an eye on. Make sure that's not a trend. On the positive side, our places for eating tax continues to perform very well. Parking fees are starting to make a comeback. We are nowhere near where we were pre-pandemic, but they're much higher than what we've seen in the prior 2 years, I would say. And you can see that just by the volume of cars that you see in downtown, in the metro lots, and traffic as well. Our use taxes are also did well this month, which is a good sign. From an expenditure level, we're also just kind of operating as expected. It is higher than last year, but that is kind of tracking with what we were expecting in terms of budget. So overall, despite a few revenues kind of not missing or not making the mark, still a good news story in the general fund for the month of April. On the water fund, again, generally as expected, not much to share here at this point in the year. April's still pretty early in terms of water use. On the revenue side, we are running higher than last year because of our rate increases. We are within what we would expect in terms of budgetary targets. So we're kind of running a little bit higher than budget, a little bit higher than last year from the revenue side of things. Expenditures are starting to tick up a little bit, which we would also expect at this point. We have a couple projects that we're kind of finishing up from last year. The Skokie Lagoon main kind of that got carried over. We had some work that was carried over. And then we've also started the water main replacements. So we've had some bills post for that. So although our expenditures are significantly higher than this time last year, our capital projects year over year are different. So you'll remember last year, our bids came in so high for our regular main replacement that we deferred that. So we are going to see this year just run higher as a result of that. On the golf side of things, also a good news story. Before I get into Stella's update, I'll just say revenues are doing well. Total revenues are up by about $140,000 over the prior year, primarily driven by greens fees, and our interest is actually doing well, hopefully. you would hope in this market. So that's a good news story. Our expenditures are about $15,000 lower than what where we were last year. So that's an overall a positive impact in the golf fund. And then I'll let turn over to Stella to talk about operations.
Thank you. As Nikki said, we had a pretty good April, about 7 days of good weather. So we're 900 rounds over budget, about 1,400 rounds over last year's April, which was dismal. So pretty good start to the season. Everything's looking good. The Golf Academy, however, is continuing to struggle. We had one of our all-star instructors have medical issues, so he's not teaching as much as he has. We brought on a new person. It's kind of a slow start for him. We just put out a promotion for him to try to garner some more lessons. But if anyone has anyone interested in golf, there are a lot of group lessons this year, which are more affordable and a little more fun way to learn. So pass along the word to friends and neighbors. And then that croquet court, which we're actually calling our multi-use court because it is the same as a putting green. We have seeded it and covered it, and we have already seen germination. So we do expect that to be open by July. And we put a little blurb inside Glencoe on croquet, and believe it or not, I've had a lot of interest. So we're looking forward to putting that out there. There'll be clinics and kind of coaching on how to learn the game, and a lot of residents are very interested in it.
Thank you, Stella. Moving on to the remaining funds, we talked about this a little bit last month. Our debt service fund was in a very similar situation to the general fund in that it had a shortfall of property taxes because of the delay in the due date. That's now caught up, so we're in good shape for our June payments, which will be all of the interest that we owe, first installment on all of our outstanding debt. And then December will be all of the interest plus principal. So we're in a good place from a cash flow perspective in the debt service fund. On the MFT fund, those projects are just getting started, so there's not a lot of activity to report there. And then capital projects fund, we already are in full swing, as you can see from driving around town, of all the projects that are in motion. So those, the capital projects fund is reflecting engineering and construction costs for our street improvement programs, Green Bay Trail crossing, and our stormwater improvements. So those are all reflected as drawdowns of fund balance. Those are bond proceeds that we issued in 2021 as part of the referendum. On the personnel side of things, no surprise to anyone, our overtime does remain elevated as we are still struggling with vacancies, a little bit higher than last year, 155,000. And then our pension costs, those are higher than this point. Actually, no, they're not. Yeah, those are higher than this point last year. That has a lot to do with that beginning of the year property tax distribution. So as we get those property taxes in, we give a portion to the pension fund, and that dollar amount is expensed. So if we back that out, we're pretty much even. So not something to be alarmed about.
Property taxes throw off a bunch of things other than property taxes.
They do. When they're 55% of your general fund, that's really gonna mess with you on multiple levels.
One thing on overtime, so I've been 8 years, and I don't think we've ever been under on overtime for our budget. Should we just budget, I mean, not this year, obviously, but next year, actually just budget more in overtime?
I think
I know
we've been
it's not-
pushing the number up annually, and to your point, perhaps we're not being conservative enough on how much we're pushing that number up. My hope is that as we start to see the ranks in public safety get refilled, and, we're swearing 3 people in Thursday night, which is great. We'll still have 7 vacancies. That'll continue to be a challenge. But interestingly, it was alleviated somewhat by Public Works last year because we didn't have any snow. And so public works overtime was significantly lower compared to public safety. So your point is well taken, and I think we'll take another look when and we're starting budget process very soon, as you'll recall.
Come back for it.
Yeah,
We'd like to.
we'll take another look, and I think, we'll reassess up against particularly our experience these last few years, which has been unique, but it's not going away either,
And
so.
it's been pretty wild, I think.
Yeah.
When we were originally predicting overtime costs, like 2 years ago, we were not anticipating the number of folks that we lost. And really that was kind of a surprise when the state legislature passed that legislation that allowed public safety officers to transfer from a police pension fund to a fire fund, which you can't normally do. And we lost a number of officers that we just did not see coming, and I think that really hit our overtime hard. We were hoping that was kind of an anomaly and didn't realize how long it would take to replace everyone. So, I mean, your point.
Yeah, and I think the other point that's worth just mentioning, and it isn't anything that we can really do anything about, but some of the backfilling is taking place with higher salaried employees. And so where we might have typical overtime costs, some of those have been atypically high because of the individuals who are working that overtime. So we'll take a closer look at that in the next budget.
Can I jump in real quick? Wouldn't some of that cost be offset by the vacancies of the salaries that aren't used? So is there a way to quantify, what we're saving by the empty
There
seats?
is, what
It's
we
not that
are,
bad, is what I'm saying. It's like offset in some way.
Yeah.
there is on a whole, because of the pace of the collective bargaining agreements and cost of living agreements, our salaries on a whole are more in the general fund. So even though overtime is offset, as a whole, when you take everything into consideration, we're still higher than what we were this time last year.
The other reality is we budget for all of those positions.
Yes.
We maintain that personnel cost, and we'll take a look. I think it's worth just double checking up against, and it's not always a one for one. But I think it also underscores how much overtime certain employees are working, that the numbers are still pushing up as high as they are.
Well, it is, overtime it is more expensive, I mean, isn't it?
It is.
Time and a half or.
It's time and a half or double time, depending on whether it's a holiday. And there are, again, we have a lot more lieutenants working overtime than we usually do, and more overtime than they usually do. So that's a fairly significant cost offset.
I don't think we did not anticipate as many laterals as we had.
Yeah.
And that is overtime, driving the overtime costs. And there are other components to our overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act that drives that cost up even higher than just their base wage. So we are required to include in the calculation of their overtime if they receive a fixed stipend, like a longevity payment that's in their collective bargaining agreement, or a paramedic pay stipend. So in most cases, especially for your senior officers that are working overtime, which is a lot of them because a lot of our senior folks are with paramedics, it's actually more than time and a half that they're getting paid for overtime, and that is required. We don't have a choice there, but it does drive the cost.
Regardless, it's a situation we'd like to see ourselves out of sooner than later. So we'll keep working on that.
Moving into the cash flow projections section.
One other comment, and this is just the reporting, so. I'm back. Couple. But your sales tax, the little spreadsheet you put in there,
Oh, yeah,
maybe
that's
just reverse it and put the recent ones at the
At the
top
top.
and the last ones at the bottom. It's a small thing, but it's not.
that's easy. No problem.
Sorry.
Makes sense. It's more-
Any sense of why sales tax is off so much?
Right now,
Just, it
It
is.
be an anomaly or.
But that's a one.
Yeah, plus it's coming from the auto dealers, right? It's
And there could be some of that, yeah, I mean, when it's a 25% year to year, it could be a difference in auto sales, it could be a series of other things, it could just be they spent more, I mean, we had a significant boost in December. So people could have spent more in December and less in January, so I think it's worth, I don't wanna speak for you, but you said it already. Nobody's panicking yet on our side.
Someone's not reporting on a timely basis.
That's also true.
That can also happen too. So sometimes with sales tax, you probably want to wait a couple months before you kind of declare a trend because there's a lot of things that can happen month to month. Department of Revenue isn't always timely. Things.
Yeah, because when you get a, whenever it was like 10.8% jump followed by a 25% decline. you're like, what?
Yeah.
Huh? I just got whiplash. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so going back to cash flow projections at the end of the report, when we're looking at annual projections, so if everything happens as we expect it is going to be, if we take what we've actually received through April, and then what we think is gonna happen for the rest of the year, only on revenue, the general fund is on track to be $2.8 million over budget. If we remove property taxes, that's 1.1 million in revenue that we're planning on being over budget. That's if everything happens as we expect it to be. So we'll obviously keep updating that number. On the water fund standpoint, there's really nothing remarkable here. We're at $17,000 over budget. And when we added expenditures into that equation, the general fund is now showing a surplus of 273,000 if everything goes as planned. When we draw out that excess of property tax revenue, we're looking closer to that 1.4 million drawdown of reserves that we were planning for in the original budget. Again, we're gonna have to watch this as our capital projects continue and our revenues continue throughout the year, but that's just kind of where we're projecting today. The water fund at the end of December is projecting a $2.5 million surplus that's primarily driven by nothing more than the issuance of bonds. Fund reserves as of April 30th, we're sitting at about 15.6 million in the general fund, which is about 65% of operating expenses. Water fund's at 3.1, which is about 54% of operating expenses. And again, I'll just remind everybody that that is purposefully being aggregated to use towards capital projects. On the inflationary side, we don't have anything new to report, which is good news, other than the issues that we've already been experiencing with supply parts and paper. But our commodities are higher than last year. Now they're running at 44.9% of budget. We are at a point where we're starting to see real upward trend on this. So this is something we're going to continue to monitor closely every month to see if we need to make any modifications. Again, nothing to be alarmed about, but it is something that we need to really start watching. From a contractual services basis, we are running higher than last year, but we're still kind of within budgetary expectations, not a concern at this time. If you were here earlier, you heard that we had 4 squads delivered today, so that's great news.
We're expecting that?
4 of them? Yeah.
In one day?
We were expecting it.
These ones we were expecting.
Yeah.
The other one not so.
Yeah, the one that got delivered in February, that was the surprise, but these 4 we did anticipate. So we ended up taking these off a lot rather than waiting for the build. So they're here. We've got them. We can't use them yet, but we've got them. So that's good.
So the one thing I would say is we are starting to see upward trends on upfitting costs now. So now at least we can get the vehicle, but then.
And duration as well. It's taking longer.
Obtaining those supplies. So to get them into use is now gonna be the next.
Have we sent the one we got in February yet to get out?
Waiting for parts.
Okay, so It's been sitting in the
We sold
garage
it.
since February. Can't outfit it,
Yeah.
so we can't use
We
it.
have 5 cars that are
Brand new cars,
regular cars right now.
just waiting to be used.
So out of the 6 we were hoping for this year, we've gotten 5, which is great, great news. And we have 1 remaining, no ETA on that yet.
Since it seems like we're getting cars faster than parts at this point, would you put a pause on the car so we don't have 6 cars sitting there? Can you-
I'm, the 6th one's probably a build, right?
Yeah, so it may not even go to production
I think so.
like they did last year to us. That was part of the situation we had here. The 4 that we just got, the dealer called us to say that the production hasn't even started yet. Then she said, oh, by the way, I have some on the lot. So we bought the ones off the lot. So that 5th one may never come, or the 6th one may never come. And I canceled again.
And I assume they're just different enough that the extra bits and pieces that you need that are on the existing cars can't be transferred and used on the.
You are correct. Every time they change the model year, they change the dimensions a little bit. So that we have to buy some new equipment.
But yes, so no, that's of course.
Planned obsolescence.
That's good news from the public safety side. On the public works department, we were able to get the step van for the water fund. That was last month, we were able to start doing that. Last month, because it was May already. And then now the only thing we're waiting on that side is just a leaf vacuum. So we
They
got
did deliver one
one,
this past month,
get one leaf vacuum. That
the
was
one that
from
we
last January.
ordered January of 2022.
So with any luck, maybe April of next year.
Third
Yeah,
one.
3rd quarter is what they're telling us, so hopefully earlier, we'll see. Okay, any other questions on the treasurer's report? Okay, I will turn this over to Margaret for the CIP update.
So this evening, your packet on pages 51 and 52 are the May update and the quarterly updates on page 53. And some of these you've already heard for discussion this evening. The Temple Court parking lot fence project, we had that slated to be $25,000 that would normally be brought to the board for approval. That's come in way under budget at $11,500. And so that won't be brought before the board. We're going to move forward with that purchase through our normal approval process. The Village Hall entrance renovation project is going to be brought before the board in June. The Village Hall and Public Works garage over the admin area roof replacement project is going to be brought before the board in June instead of April or May. We'll be starting that soon. You've heard about the patrol vehicles in depth, and then the step van as well. And then the streetlight improvement project is going to be coming before you in June, and the new sidewalk Dundee Road project will be brought before you in July instead of the May-June timeframe. And the project that's kind of been lingering on here, the traffic signal controller modifications project will hopefully be brought to the board in July instead of June this year. Staff's available for any questions you have.
What are the streetlight improvements and what's the controller modification?
Streetlights are, if you recall, we had a conversation on a streetlight policy, and the first phase was going to be just infilling streetlights at intersections where they're lacking right now. And so we're assembling a list. We'll work with ComEd to get those engineered, costed out, and we'll bring that back, probably be 10 to 12 intersections that will light up. There's the signal controller, that's the traffic signal. These are safety improvements to the 2 controllers on Green Bay Road at Park and at Harbor. This has been like a bad penny. It's just, we're on like year 3 trying to push this over the goal line. Well, the ICC, Illinois Commerce Commission recommended these safety upgrades and they're MFT qualified. So it's just been like pulling teeth to get a spec together to bid it out. So we've pulled in a consultant to help us, and we will bring that to the board. We'll call you about it.
I can ask one more time, when are we going to see
I'm just gonna bring
the walk to school?
the Safe Routes
Safe
project.
routes, yeah.
That's a good project. We're still hopeful to be on an IDOT letting summer, late summer.
This summer?
This summer for fall work. But I wouldn't, within 4 years.
And it's just sitting out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's It's IDOT being IDOT, unfortunately.
Or any other questions, we'll move on to the last item. So the last item in your packet, so it's packet page 54. There's just a brief memo that talks a little bit about the Friends of Glencoe 501c3 organization. This was created, you all remember, in 2019, and it was specifically focused on fundraising efforts for the improvements of the golf club and the golf club campus. The Friends has its own independent board, independent from the village. They have their own treasurer. So they're managing their own funds. And the latest number that I think we have is that in donations and commitments, they have over 780,000. Does that sound right, Stella? Okay. Including commitments, okay. So what we wanted to talk to the committee about tonight, and you remember in 2022, we also adopted a donation policy. And at the time, the activities of the Friends of the Glencoe Golf Club in terms of fundraising and soliciting donations was excluded from the policy because they were a separate entity. Now, as the referendum's been approved and they're ramping up their fundraising efforts, they're starting to talk about some significant funding opportunities, including naming rights. So what we wanted to talk to the committee about tonight is, as they begin ramping up their fundraising efforts and as these funds become available, talking through a process with this committee about actual acceptance of those donations. So even though we've kind of started the process of croquet court and some of the improvements at the golf club, we haven't accepted any dollars from the Friends yet. So we want to kind of understand from this committee your thoughts in terms of, once those funds are raised, is there a process that we need to incorporate in line with our donation policy of bringing that before the board? So right now, if there was something, smaller, village-wide, we brought the donation of the public safety appliance, I think it was a refrigerator, before you, fundraising program for like the lights, we had kind of sponsorship program. That would come before this committee kind of as an approval or denial of the actual acceptance of the funds.
Just to modify, just a twinge what Nikki said, I think the question is, particularly when there are opportunities that the Friends are talking about for naming rights, should there be a step taken before they say yes to that donation, so that this body has the ability to say yes to that donation before they do? Ultimately, since the village would be receiving those funds to offset the cost of the project, should the village have the ability to say yes or no to accept those funds for naming rights or for other large-scale donations?
And ultimately, the village will take ownership of those assets.
Right.
So we will own whatever clubhouse is named after will be a village asset.
So remind me the threshold for the donation policy now?
$1,000.
And then for naming rights and things where, it's gonna be very visible, is there any vetting of whose name will be on this?
That's a little bit of what I think we were talking about.
Right, and I don't know what, what is vetting, but we don't wanna have the Sacklers up on.
I was gonna say, I kind of like to make this a staff decision, but if you think about it, if we got Tackett Center wrong and we hadn't vetted it and then come back to haunt us.
What I would anticipate we would do is work with the Friends to essentially create a process that if they are getting some interest in a large scale donation, that they would raise a flag to staff to say, hey, it looks like we might have somebody who's interested in some naming rights. Potentially could be a 7-figure donation. Before we proceed, can we initiate a process of talking about what that looks like? I think we could advise the finance committee if that is brought to our attention, dialogue with you all, there may be additional information that you want or need. I don't think any of this is gonna move really fast. Nobody's gonna probably, be writing a 7-figure check within a few days or weeks. That would be something that I would expect would take some time. But I think that's what we would suggest, is that this process be given some time so that a commitment isn't made that the village perhaps is uncomfortable with.
What would make the other is the parameters of what makes us uncomfortable with this. Yeah, I mean, well,
You may not know until you see it.
well, but so it becomes hard because, somebody who's acted politically on the other end of the spectrum from whoever's on this committee, maybe they don't want it, or vice versa. I mean, so it just becomes, are there ways to articulate, these are the things that prevent us from accepting?
Isn't, even before that, isn't there sort of the basics of, because I don't remember that we've ever vetted and approved any sort of fundraising plan, there'll be naming rights for the building as a whole, and then there's going to be naming rights for this or for that, and then you can have your names on plaques here, and people have bricks with their names in the family. There's a whole variety of these, and I'm sure that the committee has already been talking with their professional fundraiser about all that.
Yeah,
But I don't know
Yeah.
that there's any input or acquiescence or anything, which I think we all need to get on the same page about what the plan is generally. And then we can talk about, that's great that other people are out there trying to do that.
Well, that may be a good subject then for the June Finance Committee meeting, is to perhaps have the Friends also attend and participate in that discussion, to talk a little bit about what they have in mind, what they've put together. That would give the committee the opportunity to provide some feedback. It doesn't have to be final feedback, but it could be initial feedback to say, hey, we're not comfortable with this, or we'd like, and I think a piece of that maybe, we may look and see if we can find other donation policies or naming policies that we could provide to you as a reference as well.
And actually giving them authority to say, we get to name it. I mean, they don't have any authority.
I would say they wouldn't have that authority. That authority should come from the village. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
But they should have the parameters, so here's the parameters, go out and get it, go hustle and get it. And
Right.
if it's in the box, it's fine, you know what I mean?
And to the point, for example, there's a great interest, it seems, in croquet. That might be a separate naming opportunity if someone's really interested in it. For a group of people might want to get together and do some kind of naming. I think we just need to be creative, because at the end of the day, to the extent we can appropriately bring in donations, that's one less tax dollar, of bonds that we have to float, which is great.
And we do have some guidelines for the existing donations that kind of put some rails up. That we will not accept donations or sponsorships from anyone that's seeking official action by the village or any officer or employee of the village. Anyone that's actively seeking to do business with the village, has any interest that may be substantially affected by the performance or non-performance of the official duties of the village, or is registered or required to be registered under the Lobbyist Registration Act. So really that's focused more on kind of conflict of interest. What this doesn't really address, and this may be a question for the attorneys, is what happens if you have something that could be potentially offensive? So what if someone buys a brick and they want to put something you might not want on there? Would you do guidelines on that? Or something similar from a naming perspective?
I would say, why don't we bring you back some information next month? And I would like to include the Friends in that process so that they're aware of it. They're working with us on it. This really should be an arm in arm effort.
Absolutely.
They should know kind of where their guardrails are, and how they can, what the comfort level would be. I think your point is exceptionally well taken, that, you know, every dollar that's raised can offset a public dollar in a different, that doesn't have to be spent, but you're giving something up for that, and we should be comfortable.
Oh, yeah,
The village
right,
should
sure.
be comfortable that whatever is being given up is worth the value of whatever
Right.
that is.
Yeah, you're not gonna sell the naming right to the building for $100.
Right.
And so in the policy, I think the policy was based on us not actually asking for money, but actually just being given money. So there
It's a
were,
very limited policy.
But there were components in that relative to sponsorships, if I
my
remember.
point was a little bit more that since we are asking for the money, do we want to have $1,000 threshold where if, can we even add something else to the policy where if we have fundraising drives, the threshold for approval is different? I don't know what it should be, but
Could it be higher?
yeah.
And I think to Phil's point, I think you could carve that out within the policy. Like the $1,000 donation, to your point, is kind of meant for a one-off donation. This would be more of a sponsorship program that would be approved by the finance committee. Like a Light the Lights, you know, we have a sponsorship for hot chocolate versus the train and so on. So this would be kind of more of a, these are the ideas that we have for naming rights. And then the finance committee provides guidelines and rails that would be approved by, to your point, then they can go off and.
For instance, everything more than the cost of a brick, to sponsor a brick would require
And whatever.
finance committee agreement or something like that. Just as not intended to be the policy,
Right,
but
yeah.
how you could structure it.
And this is kind of a splitting hairs, but we did put language in here that says this does not govern the activities of a private entity. So this would not necessarily restrict the Friends of Glencoe Golf Club and the processes that they're taking. But it does say that anything that the village accepts would be subject to the approval of the finance committee. So it's
Is it
It's
accepting
schematic.
everything they raise, or is it accepting each individual donation?
not that specific, right? So we would have to clarify.
So that's what we want to clarify.
The money that finds its way to the village, we're accepting the money that is spent in the fundraising process. It's not coming to the village, right?
Right, but I just mean because we approved the $1,000 donation.
Yeah.
But it, you know, I would say what is, to some degree, it's a larger scale, but the same concept of a sponsorship program is when someone is affixing their name to a donation, there should be a process to determine whether or not that is an appropriate donation to accept with that condition attached to it. And I think that's what we want to build out in the policy.
And depending on the activity of the Friends, there may have to be a process that's operationalized, that a report comes before this finance committee to say, the Friends is ready to transfer $250,000. Here's the source of all of it. Are you going to accept or deny it? It may just become a monthly report that comes before this body to approve and accept before we actually take the funds.
So when we had policy, and someone offered us, to help with the break room for the public safety guys or whatever, that was a conflict of interest policy, and that's an idea. Here, of course, there is the possible conflict of interest thing, but there's also, how do we feel about the name on the building? And it would be really bad if someone offered us $1 million and somebody offers us $3 million, but because we said we'll take the $1 million, we took that and all of a sudden we didn't get the $3 million. So there are a lot of other things to think about that aren't conflicts of interest, that are more fundraising and business. So Phil says they're going to be looking into that. We're not the first ones that thought of this.
Okay, right.
So let's find out what.
Well, I think we know that the Park District has a similar program, and they've amended it and adjusted it over the years that led to the naming of the Take If Center. And there are numerous similar structures in municipal government around the region. I think we can point easily to Lake Forest, which is and their golf course, and a number of naming opportunities that have come up. This isn't reinventing the wheel. It's really just creating the structure that everybody's comfortable with. And so I think we can do some work between now and next month to gather that information, have some conversations with the friends, bring kind of what their ideas are in terms of those naming thresholds and things like that, and discuss that. And if the committee needs more information, I think we have the time to do it, but that's why we brought this up this month, so that as this kind of gets rolling, we're not caught trying to make a quick decision because somebody's thinking about a donation that we may or may not be comfortable with. So we can do that. I think if that works for you all. Yeah. Okay.
Self-sand trap. Water balloons.
If I can add, while I was president of the Park District, we had some sizable donations. We struggled with this as well, and there we have some policies. I will share this with you, this kind of a summary of some of them, but most of those are fairly small, donating a tree.
Yeah.
Something like that, but,
Well, I had several conversations with Lisa Shepherd, the two significant donations that led to naming related to the Takeoff Center and Berlin Park.
yeah.
And
We had, when I was on, we had the Duke Park.
yes, that's right.
300K there.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we will.
Happy for you.
I want you to think about Dudley Underdunk Village Hall.
Or just put that in your mind.
Water.
I've already got it.
Yes. Or stormwater system, one of those two. Very important components of infrastructure.
John Oliver already did that on his show, the sewage treatment.
That's true. Okay, we'll bring more stuff back next month then.
Great. Anything else? Any other comments? All right, well, I've enjoyed my time on the board. I really respect all of you. It's been a pleasure, so.
Thank you.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
All right.